We had one location on Z Nation where, I kid you not, we were across the river from a municipal airport,
Oh.
which also had a helicopter training school. Right next to that was the Police Academy Ballistics Training Center, including full auto weapons. So that's all going off. Right uh, upstream from there is a huge paper mill. And then about a mile away from that is this massive train switching yard. And there was a seaplane that was coming in and landing and taking off from the river right there. And, we're recording like pages of dialogue with all this going on. And,
Yeah.
the producers are looking at me like,
Thank you for joining us on the Downing Cut today. I'm excited to have Tom Taylor, a founder of Tailor Made Audio, which has provided sound services for motion picture industry for over 30 years and has worked on TV and film such as The Last Dance, Z Nation, Grimm, and Yellowstone. And on top of that, he's developed a popular Jimbei Fola app with over 250,000 downloads. He is also a certified djembe instructor. Welcome to the Downing Cut, Tom. How are you?
thanks so much, Joe. I'm great.
I'm
How are
so
you?
excited. I got to turn on my fan because I'm getting hot. I got to ask, and this is for the audience. You're the first production sound mixer interview I've ever had. And actually probably the first time I've ever spoken to anyone who's really into it as you are. So I'll probably create some questions of my own because I'm just curious.
I'll try and answer.
Yeah. For our audience, so our audience are probably people who are in the film industry or trying to get into the film industry or trying to find their niche in the film industry. A lot of them are going to be actors, some of them directors, writers. And I'm excited to have people who are part of the crew because not too many of those people are coming to me and want to talk. And I'm like, they feel like they don't have anything to say. I'm like, you got plenty to say. You have a lot of experience. So I want to tell our audience, take a look at Tom's IMDb. We'll have it linked in the show notes. And wealth of knowledge here. A wealth of knowledge.
Oh,
I
well,
mean,
thank you.
pretty much an expert. I would consider you an expert in the industry.
Okay.
But just like all experts, how did your journey start? What caused you to go down this path, this career path?
So, okay, I'll try and do a truncated version here, but I grew up in Los Angeles, and every once in a while, I lived in a little neighborhood, cul-de-sac, but every once in a while, a bunch of trailers and trucks and would show up, and they'd shut down the street, and there's a big film crew, and they're filming some TV show or something, and so I kind of became familiar with the industry from a very young age, but I mean, I was going to be an architect. And let's see, when I was 16, we actually left LA, moved to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And, I was finishing high school, and I started playing drums. And I was in a, small local band. We were doing some of our own recordings. And then we met two brothers at a party one night who also, turns out, moved up to the area from LA. Their whole family did. And after filming a movie in Hayden Lake with David Carradine, and the one brother was a director of photography, and the other brother was a sound mixer, and then their dad was like a director, writer, producer. Anyhow, long story short, they, Brian, his name's Brian Crane, the sound mixer, he invited us out to his studio to record, a little 4-song EP. and he and I just kind of hit it off. And I started helping him record other bands, and then he asked me if I wanted to work on a movie with him and be his boom op. And of course, I jumped at the opportunity, and it was a different world back then. We were recording on analog tape, and we didn't really
Wow.
use a lot of wireless mics. Um, so, from a technical standpoint, it was very easy, but it also the learning curve was very steep, and uh, the parameters were very strict because there was no room for error. It's that you had one mic and you had a reel to reel recorder, and so you had to always be applying best practices and do a really good job. So all of that is to say he was a great mentor and teacher, and has since become one of my very best, if not my best friend in my life. Like he's really had an impact on my life and helped me start a career that you said earlier, like 30 years, and it's like it's kind of weird to even hear that because it's like, wow, okay, 30
Yeah.
years. um it's strange to even hear that, but
You're like, I'm not that old. What? How old were you? Were you still in high school when you did that first film, or
no,
were you at? Was after high
no, I
school?
was I was out of high school.
Okay.
And you'll have to forgive me if dates for me are,
No
um,
worries.
I've had a few car accidents and a a traumatic brain injury at one point that was,
Oh man.
like, I should say this because it's interesting and people will probably laugh, but I fell off my roof with a gas powered leaf blower strapped to my back. Um, and
Holy smokes.
yeah. Um, it's funny too because I still do it. I go up there 3 or 4 times a year to clean the pine needles off and clean out the gutters, and I'm very careful.
Yeah.
I should qualify it by saying, it's not like I'm just up there dancing around on my roof with the leaf blower. I understand the dangers, and the way this accident actually transpired is I had finished doing the work that I was doing up there, and I was literally on my way down, and as soon as I turned and committed my weight to the extension ladder, it slid on the deck below and just slid out from under me because having blown out the gutters, it got the deck all wet and the deck wood was oxidized and real slippery. So yeah, the
Oh.
ladder just slipped out from under me, and I high towered down onto the deck with this leaf blower, and I think I laid there for probably a half hour before I could even get my phone out of my pocket. And paramedics came and they're like, "You should go to the hospital. You probably have some cracked ribs." And I was like,
Ooh.
"Yeah, okay." But all of that is to say that in some instances, my I've realized that my memory just doesn't serve me very well.
No worries. I heard there's a rumor out if you take some mushrooms, it might help.
Yeah, and
So
and I am a fan,
yeah,
especially microdosing. I think it's you know
yeah,
I have no qualms saying that publicly. Like
yeah.
I highly recommend it. It's yeah, quite therapeutic.
So Tom, there's some technical stuff I want to ask, but can you give the audience just kind of an overview, real quick, on what does a sound mixer do? What is it exactly? I mean, we know
Okay.
you have a bag full of equipment. We know there's a mic. What's happening in there?
So at times there's a bag. Um, at times it's a sound cart. At times it's several carts, or carts and a bag. I mean, like, well, there's a sound cart right there. I don't know how well you can see it, but
Yeah, we can see
that's
it.
that's one of my carts. It's got, in fact, I can just see here. It's got,
Holy smokes!
so these are all receivers. There's a recorder here, a fader panel that's connected to the recorder, monitors so I can see what the camera's seeing. This is
Nice.
communication gear, for between me and the boom op, um, and everything's wireless. And so I have an antenna system that I attach, and that's for like the bigger shows. Um,
Yeah.
it's got a complete DC system on it, so I can go without power, for pretty much all day. Um,
Wow.
and then if I'm doing smaller gigs where I'm just working by myself, actually I've got my bag rig right here. Um, this is one of my bag rigs. Um, it's
How
got
much
like
does that weigh?
about 30 pounds,
Man.
25, 30 pounds. It's
Yeah.
kind of stripped down right now because I only have a couple of receivers in it. But it has the sound devices, 888 mixer, recorder, and then there's some wireless gear. There's some time code gear, and of course also like the cart. It has like DC batteries, so it's all kind of self-contained. And sometimes I'll just kind of throw this thing over a shoulder if I'm not going to be wearing it for too long. Other times I have a harness that helps
Mm.
distribute the weight. Um, or a lot of times, what I like to do is I've got this Pelican case, and I just set it on the case.
Nice.
And since the boom is wireless, and I can operate the recorder from an app on my phone, a lot of times I can just leave this, and I can take the boom and go do what I need to. And so the technology, the way it's advancing these days,
Yeah.
um, has enabled us to do things that 30 years ago we couldn't.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about that because obviously 30 years ago in that time span, how do you stay on top of what's coming out as far as technology goes and kind of the nuances? Because you hear horror stories of wireless and interference and all this other stuff. So how do you kind of navigate that whole arena with which product is the best, which one's going to work for you, and all that?
That's a great question, and you know in some ways it's a war of attrition because financially I've spent more money on sound gear than you know than all the houses that I've owned combined.
Oh,
um, and it's never ending. It's not like
yeah.
once you get gear you're done buying it, because even like I tend to kind of adhere to the buy once cry once sort of mentality, but that's it's not always accurate, because even at that, after a certain number of years you're going to have to replace stuff. And another example would be like for like the FCC comes in and says, well, we're going to sell off half of the spectrum that you use to the telecom company, so it's no longer legal for you to use those wireless units that you have.
Wow.
And so now you have to spend 30 grand having them all refreaked, to different frequencies, just to stay legal and current. Um, so yeah, it's a vicious cycle in a lot of ways, and kind of frustrating. But if you can get in on a good run of gigs, you can make some decent money. Sound mixers are it's one of the few positions on set where not only do you get a labor rate, but you also get paid for your gear in the form of a kit rental.
Oh, nice.
So much as a production company would sometimes rent like a camera package or a lighting package, they'll also rent the sound gear from you, because they obviously don't want to spend all the money, and time and effort it takes to maintain it. So, they just rent it from you. So, I have a loan out company, and I treat it, like it's basically a rental company. And my relationship with almost any production I work on is twofold, myself as a laborer, and then
Hmm.
myself as basically a rental house,
Okay.
which is sometimes difficult for productions to uh, look past. They kind of want to treat you as just one and the same person, and which is understandable, but at the same time, it has been fraught in the past, simply because, um, as you know, everything tends to get exponentially more expensive, especially post COVID. And yet, some of these productions, they're working off budgets that are literally, in some cases, 10, 15 years old, and expecting you to do things for rates that, are just not sustainable, frankly.
Yeah,
So it can be frustrating.
that's what's happening with Boeing right now.
Yeah.
Exact same thing.
Yeah.
um, the with I would assume that because it's your gear and you're working with it, are you staying competitive with the other rental houses on top of that? But there's also an added bonus is you know how to use everything that you have. So I mean that's a bonus versus hiring a sound guy and going, okay, what do you need? And then them recalibrating and making sure everything works and all that. That saves a lot of time and money. So
Yeah.
how does you're
Well,
pretty competitive and then
with sound gear too, there's a lot of what I like to call voodoo involved. It's not actually voodoo. It's really what it boils down to is, doing a lot of research, and learning your craft. There's a lot of science involved, especially when you're dealing with radio frequencies and wireless mics. Um, you have to coordinate your frequencies. You have to make sure that you're not, well, without getting too into the weeds, you have to attenuate your levels and everything so that you're not getting a bunch of unwanted RF noise. Um, it's quite complicated, and on an easy day when there are no problems, nobody would be aware of any of this, because if it works, it works, and you hit the red button and you put the mic in the air, or you put the lav mic on the actor, and you record it and you turn in the files and everyone smiles. Um, but that's best case scenario, best practices. Then
yeah.
there's everything else, um, which we had one location on Z Nation where, I kid you not, we were across the river from a municipal airport,
Oh.
which also had a helicopter training school. Right next to that was the Police Academy Ballistics Training Center, including full auto weapons. So that's all going off. Right uh, upstream from there is a huge paper mill. Um, and then about a mile away from that is this massive train switching yard. And there was a seaplane that was coming in and landing and taking off from the river right there. And, we're recording like pages of dialogue with all this going on. And,
Yeah.
the producers are looking at me like,
Is this working?
are, that's okay for sound. And I'm like, yeah, no, I got a filter. I'll take that right out. And then, I have to tell them, it's like, look, this, it's not a sound problem. It's actually a location problem. So the
Yeah.
sounds that you're hearing, I am recording with the utmost clarity, but I am hearing all of that, and
Yeah.
which means it's that's unfortunately, you know best case scenario, you're going to get a good guide track, for looping,
Right.
um, which is when you have to go back later and replace all the dialogue.
ADR, right?
Yeah,
ADR process. Are
yeah.
you part of that? Do you go in studio or you just give them?
Very rarely. I
Okay.
I don't like to be, simply because it's kind of tedious, and um, I would prefer to avoid, the desk job type situation. But
Yeah.
there's also a level of irony to that, because it's like, okay, here's a desk job, and you're sitting here and and editing whatever, and then you look at this sound cart, and it's kind of like, well, how is that not just like a desk job on wheels, you know.
Right.
So um,
How do
I
you haul that thing? How is it? You have to take it apart and rebuild it, or does it
no,
all?
no. So I've got a cargo van. Um, and this studio that I'm in right now is in the basement of my house. And when I bought this house, I bought it specifically because it has an exit door uh, on the north end of the house where I actually had to spend a week excavating like basalt to make it so that I could get these carts up because this one weighs about 400 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
And then this one back here is maybe, I don't know, 200 pounds. Um, but I've got ramps and I just roll them up into the back of the van. And then,
Nice. 400 pounds. You're just like shoving that thing.
yeah, but you know, if the tires are inflated well, you know, it rolls
Yeah.
along pretty well. I've had to
Okay.
push it up some hills and, you know, at times it's, you know, not the funnest thing in the world, but you know, it's designed to go a lot of places, you know, because
Yeah.
we're shooting out in the woods, you know, and there's a little trail and then you have to go off the trail and so yeah, I've shoved this cart through some pretty nasty terrain.
The industry needs to come up. So my wife and I have this little wagon for our daughter, and it's motorized and it's got wheels on it. I think that's probably a good. That might come up next for innovation.
Oh, there are
Um,
already several folks, one of whom is a good friend of mine, who make motorized packages for these carts.
there you
Um,
go.
and you know, I thought about it because it's cool. Like it just attaches to the handle, so then
Yeah.
you literally turn it on and you turn the handle much like on a motorcycle, and you know, and that's your throttle and you know, little
That's
electric
it.
motor. But you know, frankly, it's like, well, part of it is being a musician, so there are other things I want to spend money on. But
That makes sense.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm kind of I'm kind of at a point where I'm tired of spending money on gear all the time.
Yeah.
So
I mean that I can't imagine. 30 years in the business. Every what? Probably 3, 4, 5 years. You're constantly upgrading. New techs
um,
coming out.
I don't know if it's that. I mean, it's every year I I seem to, you know, and it's usually when I get to the end of the year and I start going through my taxes that I realize it's like, oh, okay, I had, you know, like $40,000 in you know uh, equipment write-offs this year,
Yeah. Yeah.
which you know, like if you're running a landscaping company or a construction company, or you know, or if you're you know a camera person and you
Yeah.
know you're buying and selling cameras and lenses. I mean, those guys, those like they've got it pretty bad. So I'm not going to complain too much. It could be worse.
We're all family together.
Yeah.
What I want to ask you something from your perspective, and it's going to be a little different because you're a sound mixer, but you have an insight that nobody has because you're still behind the camera.
Mm.
What makes a good actor? And you've worked with a lot of actors.
Wow. Man, that's a great question. Um,
I'm sure you've seen the good and bad.
oh yeah. And you know, I think what makes a good actor, if were to try and distill it down into to one word, it would be confidence, frankly, because you have to leave everything behind and just really like become this character. And that you know, there are method actors, and there you know, there's a lot of different ways to get there, and every actor will have their own journey. But you know, I think the really good actors, the common thread to me seems to be confidence, where because if you're nervous, you know, if you're nervous and you're doing theater, and this is no slam on theater whatsoever, that's a whole different challenge. And I have the utmost respect for theater actors, and they are actors. You know, they're all actors.
Mm-hmm.
But um, when you're acting for screen, and perfect example, you go into a close up. I mean, that frame is right here. I mean, they're seeing the pores in your face, like they're seeing everything. And if you don't have the confidence necessary to, you know, portray this character, then that little bit of a lie that you're telling becomes amplified. because really all we're doing as filmmakers is we're capturing moments,
Yeah.
and then we string them all together, and hopefully we have this series of moments that can continue to suspend the viewer's disbelief. We can keep them in this story, and as soon as there's something that takes you out of that story, now instead of watching a story unfold and being, basically invested in these characters and in the story, now you're watching a production and very aware of it, and you start thinking like, oh, that light's a little harsh, or oh, the sound is muffled, or oh, I can see the lav mic, or the focus just got
Yeah.
soft for a second, like, especially for filmmakers. I mean, that's what we do. We critique the shit out of everything,
Yeah.
because that's how we watch movies. And it's a rare production that you can watch and not watch the production and just watch the story.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, a good actor, I think, has that confidence and can just freely be that person, that they're portraying in front of, you know, a bunch of strangers with a camera in their face and a boom mic right over their head, and somebody in there, like messing with
Yeah.
their clothes and their hair and makeup, and like it's not an easy job. And people wonder, like, why do actors get paid so much? Well, try doing it. Like, literally just try it and see, like, there is something to it, and it does require a little bit of skill, like just a little bit.
Yes. Got to be prepared. I
It,
mean, with confidence, it's all about preparation and making sure you are down and you got everything down and all your boxes are checked
yep.
and moving along. I want to talk about technique in a bit, but you've already answered a couple of my questions. Uh, but one of them, so we look at Yellowstone and you look at Tim Travers and the Time Travelers Paradox. That's a
Mm-hmm.
long title.
Yeah.
What would you say are the key differences when it comes to sound design and working from on a large scale production to an indie film?
Okay, well, we should clarify, when you're talking about sound design, you're talking primarily about the post sound process.
Okay,
Be-
sound mixing,
yeah, a lot of the sound design happens in post, but if you're talking about production sound, um,
production sound. Sorry.
there's no, that's fine. There's not a whole lot of difference except potentially scale. Um, and like on a smaller production, like the Tim Travers thing, um, like it might be a mixer and a boom op, and that's it. On a production like Yellowstone, like my uh, work with Yellowstone was all second unit sound. I was not the first unit sound mixer.
Okay.
I worked with him. Brian, great guy. In fact, he also he lives in Santa Clarita, where I grew up. So we had some pretty cool conversations while I was there, working with them. But it's really just scope. Like, you could, on Yellowstone, you could have, like this massive main unit production day going on, and then you'd have these like spin-off units that would go and get, driving shots, or just smaller setups at other locations that tie into, the actors that were working that day, because a lot of it is just scheduling, frankly. um, and so it's really just scope. In terms of organization, there's not always a whole lot of difference. It can be really well oiled and well organized, you know, from the little micro budget thing to the huge, massive production, or it can be just a complete shit show. And I've experienced both. And, like, there have been times when I'm just sitting there kind of scratching my head. It's like, you know, how big is the budget on this thing? And like, where's all the money going? Because like nobody knows what's going on. There's, it's just chaos, complete
Yeah.
chaos. So, I mean, I think probably the biggest difference though would be, in most cases when you're doing the really small budget stuff, um, you kind of have to approach it from the standpoint that whatever you're getting on the day is going to wind up being the production sound. And they can treat it, they can add to it, they can do an M&E mix, on top of the dialogue mix, but they're not going to have a huge ADR budget, and you know they don't have an entire team of sound people to go through and polish turds. So you can't give them turds. You have to really make sure that you're on point. So in a lot of ways, it's much more demanding, I think. Not quite as
Oh,
stressful.
yeah.
There's
Do
something about having like, a tent full of 20 producers and
oh,
and just, when you get on the bigger productions, there's just this air sometimes that permeates. There's this density to the air where it's just, you can see it on people's faces. Everyone's just like afraid for their job. You know, yeah, I mean, frankly, it's like nobody want, nobody wants to mess up. And so it's people are very careful about whatever they do, whatever they say, whatever they commit to. Um, and, because of the money involved, it's understandable.
sure.
But I don't know. I'm not sure which I prefer. So I think I'll have to
Hmm.
kind of ruminate on that a little bit. I like them both
Yeah.
for
Let me
different.
ask, when you want a bigger production, are you assigned some crew members or people to help you out, or are you responsible for bringing people on board?
Typically, yes. Pretty much on any production that I work on, very rarely will they hire someone without my approval. Because, as the production sound mixer, I can't guarantee that I'm going to be able to turn in good tracks if I have a boom op or a sound utility who don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Um, and so, and you can be the best sound mixer in the world if you have a horrible boom op or sound utility, that doesn't doesn't understand their job, where to put the mic, what to look out for on set in terms of, like if there's a refrigerator running, like right next to somebody that's, like James Spader, just practically whispering,
Yeah.
you're going to loop that scene because that all you're going to hear is that refrigerator. And a lot of times as a sound mixer, you don't get the opportunity to um, stay on top of all those things. So those are things that you delegate. And that's why it's so important to have a boom op who, for all intents and purposes, can think like a sound mixer, who can understand what you need to get, and it's like, oh no, we're going to need to put lav mics on them because, this is a wide shot and they're not doing any coverage. And so, um, fortunately, that's something that they usually leave to me, like, and if I'm working out of town, like I did a thing in Columbus, Ohio a few years back where they kind of forced me to hire a local. They weren't going to put a local, they weren't going to put a boom op up in a hotel. So,
Oh,
and it was kind of slim pickings, and it was like, you know, well, I don't know any of these people, and the person that I wound up going with was very green at the time, but super nice guy. Um, and his last name is also Taylor, and we established a good relationship, and he was just the kind of guy that he'd just keep trying no matter what. And he got some criticism from other crew members at times, but at that point you just have to kind of be like, hey, this is what we're doing, and cut him some slack, and we'll get there.
yeah.
And, we got through it, and but yeah, like I have a few folks, um, guys and gals that I prefer, um, and frankly, a lot of times it's better to have a female boom op simply because when it comes to wiring female actors, um,
Mm.
you don't get into the weird territory of,
Yeah.
people make jokes about stuff like that, and it's always really frustrating because one of our biggest challenges is establishing trust with the actors. And if you don't have that, in your relationship with the actors, it can just become a nightmare because
Yeah.
you're in there all the time and you have to make sure that the mic is placed correctly and it's not making a bunch of noise. You have to change the batteries. Where the transmitter packs wind up going sometimes is, less than ideal, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
So, there's, there's a lot of delicate steps that, it takes someone that understands the whole process. And so, I've had several female boom ops that it takes a lot of that stress away, frankly. you know it's like, yeah, go wire, so and so, and you don't have to worry about like just the weird stuff that sometimes comes along with some of that.
Sure. Yeah. The boundaries. I can relate. My wife, for wiring women, she would step in and she
Yep.
would do it. Yep.
Yeah, and we
And
typically, like, we'll have someone from the wardrobe department, you know, and
mhm.
if it's something where the costume is designed in such a way that, like, there, we it's a bit of a process to get the transmitter placed, then, I'll hand it to the wardrobe professional and say, okay, give them, some minor instructions and say, just here's, what you're going to do, and then they go and do it. And there's a lot of different ways to get there, but yeah.
Let me ask you something. I'm going to ask you about the boom mic. If you were to onboard someone who's green that maybe had, maybe been on a shoot, but doesn't really know how to operate a boom, what are like the top things that you would just tell them? Like, I mean, obviously aim the boom, right?
Yeah.
Don't
So,
and don't let the cord hit. But what else is there?
well, man, I mean, that's frankly, if you were in film school, it could be a 300 level class in itself. There's so
Wow.
much for a boom op to know. But the gist of it, um, is obviously mic placement. You want the mic. Um, you don't want it on the top of their head. You don't want it. It needs to be centered. It needs to be out in front of them. And what I like to do is kind of, you point it at the chest cavity so that the sound waves coming out of their face cross the pattern of the mic in such a way, and the mic pattern terminates against their chest, which also has some resonance, especially in some of the lower frequencies.
Interesting.
And that gives the richest, fullest tones as far as dialogue goes. Um,
That's a good tip.
yeah, and it's always frustrating too because you have these like armchair boom ops that like to, when inevitably you wind up with an issue, where you're in hard sun and there's shadows, and or there's reflection issues because they're wearing mirrored sunglasses or whatever, and you
Right.
always get someone that just, well, can't you just scoop it, and what they mean is, can't you just go from underneath, because if it's
Mm.
framed like this, then you can use this bottom frame line and kind of point the mic up, from underneath, which is, frankly, sometimes that is the only solution. But it's always funny because, they say that like it's the same thing. Like, it doesn't matter as long as the mic is somewhere in there. And it matters a great deal because the microphone doesn't have two ears and two eyes and a brain to process the information that's coming into it. Where you or I can have a conversation, and if there's a background noise or whatever, we can, subconsciously just tune it out because we can focus on, what we want to hear. A microphone can't do that. And so, even all other, aspects being the same, the difference between a mic pointing down and terminating against somebody's chest cavity and pointing up, if that mic is pointing up, it's basically listening to outer space, which
Yeah.
I mean, if you ever have the time and you're interested enough to do it, you'd be surprised at the difference in how that sounds. And just the mic that's pointing up, it just doesn't have that quality to it. It just sounds airy and thin, and it just doesn't sound good.
Interesting. Would you still want to point it towards the chest then? Angle it
Yeah,
45 degrees or
yeah.
something? Okay. Now, I've seen something. So, I made a short film and the whole miking thing was just, yeah.
I'm sorry.
So, and I've tried to study and learn some of the techniques. What would you say when it comes to miking an individual? Like I even saw that they were taking two triangles of duck or gaffer tape, putting
Yep.
them together, putting it on the chest. And what technique do you use? Let me ask it in a different way. What is the most popular technique that you use to mic somebody
Well, I mean, the most popular technique is to
for
just
you?
use to just use a mounting, you know, for me, it's a small piece of rubber that is, injection molded, and it's designed specifically for the lav microphone. And then you put a, two-sided uh, adhesive on that piece of rubber, and you can mount it to clothing. You can mount it to their skin, if they're not adverse to that. Um, but that's just the kind of launching point. That's like, that's like telling the boom op, okay, go stand behind the camera, or somewhere next to the camera, and put the mic out in front of their face. Like that's where you start. But then
Yeah.
there are so many other parameters that get involved, to where, you really have to start thinking on your feet. And so, I mean, I've gone up into hair, and attached the transmitter to, like the back of a bra strap, or sometimes even up inside a helmet, or tie knots a lot of times, and then you go up under the collar and back down the
Yeah.
back of their shirt if they're wearing a jacket. I mean, there's about as many ways to mic someone as there are someone's. you know, I
But
mean,
you're not as concerned with the if you stick it on the collar and the microphone's pointing down, you're
I'm
not
not
it's
for
still going to pick
those.
up. Okay.
So the boom mics that we use are directional. They're cardioid, hypercardioid, and that means that, they have a shape that has a lobe that comes out from the capsule, and it creates a certain pattern. The shotgun mics are, have an even longer, narrower pattern. But with the lav mics, they're omnidirectional, which means any orientation you have that mic, as long as it's not like rubbing against clothing, or, like body hair, like in my case, you'd be in trouble. But um, it doesn't really matter what direction it's facing. It's still gonna, you know, pick up the voice the same way. And the technology is, you know, it's evolving enough to where there are some really good lav mics on the market now, almost to where you'd be hard pressed to tell the difference, in ideal situations. That said, I always prefer, a $2,500 boom mic, to a $400 lav mic.
Yeah.
There's a
Oh yeah.
reason that, there's for that cost difference. And
Sure.
a lot of it is just simply in how they sound.
And I think it's good to state that every I've been an actor for 20 years, and so we know that the soul of the film is sound. If your sound is crap,
Oh,
then that your film doesn't have anything, right? I mean, that's the common knowledge is
I
you
agree.
got to have good sound.
I agree.
Yeah.
You can have a soft image, or, an otherwise, like, maybe just not ideally framed image, and the the human mind can be kind of, forgiving. But yeah, for some reason, when it comes to sound, if it's bad sound, it can render an otherwise, wonderful production unwatchable,
Yeah.
simply because it's just like, you're kind of like straining and like, what, or it's just grating.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know, it's interesting. There are a lot of friendly debates that occur on set, especially between camera department and sound department. Um, to the point where I don't know if you're familiar with like movie set memes or some of these other
Yeah.
social media groups, but there have been competitions where people vote, and I think the first time they did it, it came down to like camera versus sound, and sound won, and it was like this big thing. I remember one of the first productions I worked on this years and years ago. We were shooting this little low budget thing up in Sandpoint, and it was in the middle of winter. Really, really difficult shoot. It was cold every day. We were just getting our asses handed to us every day, and so
Oof.
at the end of the day, we'd all go back to one of the Grips hotel rooms, and we'd drink and smoke, and we'd hang out, and just kind of let off steam. And there's a couple Apple boxes sitting around, and so the sound mixer that I was working with at the time, Nigel Elliott, one of the coolest people I've ever met in my life. uh, so I was booming for him, and he's also a drummer. And so there was one night where he and I were just sitting on Apple boxes and playing them, much like there's an instrument now called a cajon, I think it is, which is essentially a box that you sit
Oh.
on and play with your hands. But he and I were doing that and having a good time, and then it kind of turned into this conversation about, well, what's more important, camera or sound? And someone said, uh, well, in the beginning, God said, "Let there be light." So light. So camera's more important. And I sat there, and then I was like, in the beginning, God said, and everybody in the and we were drunk and stoned, and so
Yeah.
but everyone was just like, oh,
Revelation.
yeah, and it was so funny. But like, there's kind of this, it's usually in good fun,
Yeah. Oh,
this
absolutely.
like mildly competitive sort of, because there's also a joke that goes around set where it's like, well, where's the key light going? Well, where's the boom op standing? And it's like,
Yes.
place the key
Hmm.
light there, and so there's kind of this give and take. Um, but one of the things I found with the camera folks is, and I think it applies to almost any departmental, interdepartmental relations, is if you show a person that you recognize their challenges and you recognize what they're up against and how difficult their job is, suddenly there's a mutual respect. I remember I had a pretty difficult time with this particular first AC, and this kind of went on for years. Where he's just kind of a cranky dude, and like he old school, and one of the best ACs I've ever worked with. But
Yeah.
he was known for like he just like, and he just, especially for sound, it was like he didn't have a lot of room, for and so the relationship was always, the conversations were very short and kind of like rah. But I remember one night in particular, we were doing this shot where he was, it was really low light, long lens, there was a lot of movement. It was one of the most difficult things for a first AC to pull off, to keep focus.
Hmm.
And I watched him do it, and then I was just like, man, that was cool. Like that, I was watching the monitor, and you were sharp the whole time, and that was just amazing. How do you do that? And I could see like this little turn, and suddenly it was like, oh, okay, this dude knows what I'm up against. And then over the years, we kind of developed this camaraderie where it's like we sort of start watching out for each other. And that's one thing that's really common with film crews, especially when you work with the same folks uh, year after year, is you do develop this camaraderie that it's hard to explain. You just have to experience it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, that's in the Pacific Northwest. I know there's a lot of film crews that they all stick together because they're
Yeah.
building that. They have that mutual respect and language. Um, Real quick, I want to talk about your app. How
Oh
did
yeah.
that develop, and how did that all work out? Like how did it happen?
So I've been playing drums about as long as I've been into sound. Um, I started out playing trap kit, kind of self-taught, and then when I went to college when I was 25, and I started taking lessons and learning jazz and Latin stuff. And during that time, I was also playing in a band where I was playing a conga, and it was instrumental, really kind of world beat sort of stuff, really ethereal. We had a didgeridoo player and really cool stuff. Uh, and then I saw another small band um, where a guy was playing a djembe, and the range that this drum had, especially the deep low end, I was just like, I
Yeah.
was mesmerized. I was like, I got to get a djembe. So I was living over in Coeur d'Alene at the time, and I came into Spokane, and there was a store downtown that this friend of mine uh, owned called Moonshadow, and he sold, among other things, he sold djembes. So I bought a djembe and I started playing djembe, and I wasn't playing it traditionally. I was what a lot of traditional djembe fola and West African drummers would call a drum circle drummer. And there's a certain level amount of disdain actually that comes with that
Hmm.
for well, I don't want to get too into the weeds with that, but um, in any case, I wound up hearing about a workshop that was coming. I think it was, I want to say early 90s. This guy named Mamadi Keita was coming to Spokane. My friend Michael, who owned Moonshadow, uh, he was hosting Mamadi. Mamadi was this djembe fola from Guinea uh,
Wow.
who came to town for a weekend, and he did beginning, intermediate, and then advanced classes. And there were like, I don't know, 60 people that showed up to these things. Like it was
Wow.
a room full of people with djembes. And I thought, well, yeah, I'll go check this guy out. Maybe I can learn some chops, that I can apply to my band. And the world that I was opened up to with West African drumming, traditional West African drumming, um, it it changed my life. He just completely blew my mind. The rhythms, they're so complex, and just the dialogue between the drums, and then with the drummers and the dancers, and the like, it was this rabbit hole that is literally, I don't know if I'll ever find the end of it in my lifetime. It's so deep.
Yeah.
So I started studying in earnest. And I got his book, and I had a group of friends where we'd get together and we'd play these rhythms out of the book, and we even started recording them,
Nice.
and then in 2012 I just got this wild hair basically, and I was like, I'm going to build an app. I want to build an app, a drumming app, because in Spokane it's often difficult to find 4 or 5 other people that you can just assemble, and hey, let's play a bunch of West African rhythms, which there it's a lot of different parts, and
Hmm.
so it requires a number of players. So I thought, man, if there was an app where I could just put my headphones on and play along with, that'd be so cool. And that was the start of it. That was in 2012, and I started drawing wireframe diagrams, and then I was putting these diagrams into Illustrator and making them a little more, complex, and then I started learning Xcode, and uh, after about a day and a half of that, I I was able to build a page where you had a button, and if you push the button, it could change color.
Yeah. Yeah.
and and I realized, okay, I'm not going to become a programmer. I'm just not. Like, that's not in the cards for me. I have too many other things I like doing, and I just, that level of, it's just
Yeah.
beyond me. And so I wound up contacting a local trio of programmers who, uh, to my, just I can't be more grateful to these guys, and I've paid them tens of thousands of dollars to do the work that they do, but frankly, if it were anyone else, it probably would have costed hundreds. Um, and
Yeah.
they worked with me, and we started uh, putting this thing together. And I contacted Momedy, and I said, "Hey, I'm building this app. Nobody's going to be looking for a djembe app built by Tom Taylor. You know, would you be interested in having your name on it?" And so that started a dialogue that culminated in a relationship between myself and Momedy that I never would have dreamed of having. Um,
Wow.
and we we implemented. He has schools all over the world. The Tam Tam Manding Djembe Academy. That's his uh, djembe schools. And so we we built the curriculum for these schools into the app. So there's
Nice.
like these levels similar to a martial arts trajectory
Yeah.
where you can even test and you can pass these levels, and uh, the end of which you can become like a certified uh, senior um, teacher, which is a long process, and it includes trips to Africa. It includes, I mean, there's the testing is
Wow.
really rigorous. It's pretty crazy, but which I started that process, and I got a good ways through it. And in the meantime, we finished the development on the app in 2016, and Momedy invited me to Beijing to roll out the app. And so in
Nice.
April of 2016, I flew to Beijing. I met all of the senior certified teachers who were there, and was just invited into this world that, I mean, I still kind of pinch myself when I think about it, because these are, some of the top, you know, djembe Fola in the world. And they're just such amazing people. And the family, that very much like a film crew family, you know,
Yeah.
and from these people who are literally from all parts of the world. And, we had the app up on a projection screen, and he was, showing it to this Chinese audience. And, you know, he walked me out on stage, and everyone, like this all this applause and everything. And it was just like, okay, whoa.
See, you are a celebrity. I knew it.
It was a trip. I mean, I've been in front of crowds before. Like, I sang in a band, and we did a thing down in Moscow where I think there was like 12,000 people there, and that was a whole different level of unnerving. But this, was like, it was it was huge, but it was also intimate, and it was like this. Here is my, like my mentor thanking me and saying that he loves me, and like, and it was just like, it was just the most amazing, fulfilling experience. So we launched the app in 2016, and we've done a few updates since then. It's only on iOS right now, um, but we've had is it about a quarter of a million downloads since
Yeah.
2016, with basically little to no advertisement. There hasn't been a ton of advertisement for it because it's such a niche community.
Sure.
Um,
How does it work? You said you have to put headphones in. You can play
you
with
can
anyone around the world.
No, so I mean that's it. Basically, it's kind of like an encyclopedia. Let's see if I can show you here.
Okay.
I'll just pull it up on my phone. So there's the splash page,
Nice.
That's
Yeah.
Momedy right there. Momedy passed in June of 21.
Oh
Um,
wow.
but so these are all traditional West African rhythms.
Oh, okay. Oh,
And
so you play with it.
yeah, so you
That's how you
select
learn.
one, and then there's some notation that comes up.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
and there's a few features, where you can adjust the volume or you can mute the different parts. See these little check marks here.
Yeah.
Um, but you can hit play, and then it'll give a djembe signal followed by all the parts, and they'll just loop. So
That is so
sounds.
cool.
This is a rhythm called Casa Soro. It's a harvest rhythm. Um, so I'll just hit play and
Oh wow. I love it.
so you can play along with it. You can listen to just the djembes if you want, or just the dunu parts, which are down here. And then if you hit the information page, there's a map that shows the region that the and the ethnic group where that particular rhythm originated.
Wow.
And there's a blurb on, like just a bunch of information on that rhythm, and you can uh, you can speed it up and slow it down.
Oh, that's cool.
Um, so yeah, there's currently 63 rhythms on the app, and they're divided up into a bunch of different ways, including the different levels of curriculum for Temtem Ending.
Yeah.
Um, and this is actually really good timing because I have spent literally the last year and in earnest probably the last 3 months recording and editing another 70 or so rhythms that are actually Mamadi Keita original rhythms. They're rhythms that he created.
Oh
Um,
wow.
and I'm adding them to the app. And I'm also releasing a Droid version finally, which to the West African drumming world, this is something that people have been bugging me about for years, and it's just I just haven't been able to do it because it's like literally 20 grand just to get the thing up and running.
Yeah.
And I just I haven't had that kind of money. Um,
Sure.
but finally was able to pull the trigger on it, and I've been working with the dev team, and we've got a working Droid version, and now we're getting into the updates for all the Momedy rhythms, and I'm crossing my fingers that we'll have this thing out by Halloween.
Oh, that's just around the corner.
Yeah,
This podcast will come out after that, so you'll probably have it already done.
man, I hope.
What? Let me see. I was gonna look it up. How much is it?
Well, right now the initial download is actually free, and
Wow.
and with that you get the entire encyclopedia of rhythms, and 8 of those rhythms have full functionality, just like what I just demonstrated, where you could hit play and you could listen to the rhythms and you could mix the parts and everything. And then there are currently 3 rhythm packs that you can get using in-app purchases. There's a beginner, an intermediate, and then there's a group of rhythms called Dunumba rhythms, which is a special group of rhythms in West African drumming, um, which is a super deep rabbit hole into itself. But without going down it too far, Dunumba rhythms are basically it's dance of the strongmen, and what it is, it's very competitive. And in the village, they have these Dunumba rhythms, and they all they have different meanings. Subtly, there's different meanings, but they're all pretty much they belong to this family of rhythms, and they have some characteristics that are all similar. Um, but it's kind of this opportunity for especially the dancers to kind of show feats of strength, and it's competitive, sometimes
Oh yeah.
extremely competitive, and sometimes there are some deep rivalries that will come out, and
Wow.
but it's for the most part it's all in good fun, and it's
Yeah.
just an integral part of the lifestyle.
See, Tom, I meant it when I said it. Music is the soul. Sound is the soul. I mean, that's
Is
across the board, around the world. That's pretty much it.
yeah.
Let's go back into sound mixing.
Sorry.
But that was exciting. I mean, that's amazing. My wife's gonna love that. So, what would you say is the most in the last 30 years? What's the most important lesson you've learned working on film sets and doing sound mixing? What stands out of like
Mm,
other than the technology changing, but when it comes to film relationships, when it comes to technicalities of the art of what you're doing, anything stand out?
yeah, actually, it's funny that you asked that because one of the things that I've learned, it seems to kind of be a reoccurring theme for me, um, but it's the importance of taking pause uh, on film sets. Things can often get really heated really quickly because there's so much money involved, and because a lot of times you're fighting light, or there's some, an actor is getting on a plane in like literally half an hour, and this is the last time you're going to see them because then they're flying halfway around the world and they're not available for ADR, or things of that nature. So it creates this atmosphere a lot of times where everybody's potentially on edge, and um, it can it can bring out the best in people in terms of rising to an occasion, and it could also bring out the worst in people in terms of reacting, in terms of just you know losing patience. um, and I'm you ask any of my colleagues, and everybody will agree that I'm pretty vocal when it comes to things. I don't, I speak my mind, and uh, sometimes to my detriment. Um, there's that adage, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Which, yeah, okay, great, but the squeaky wheel can also just get replaced. And so to remember that, frankly, you're just a wheel in this thing, regardless of how important you or someone else thinks your job is. I mean, sound mixer it's up there, like it's a fairly important job, but
Yes.
it's not, they can go on without me, and I've missed very few days in my career due to illness. But if I were to have to guess how many days I've missed due to just somebody potentially, just not hiring me because somebody else said, yeah, he's a great sound mixer, but he's a bit of a hothead. Um, you know, when I take pause and actually think about that, it, it stings a little bit. And it's kind of like, okay, Tom, like, what's the greater good here? What's the, maybe, maybe I need to just, I hate to say it, but not care so much. At the end of the day, no one's dying on the operating table. We're making movies.
Right.
So that's, yeah, I think just take pause and just remember that we're all human, and yeah, we're making movies and there's a lot of money involved, but in the grand scheme of things, what does any of it truly matter?
Yeah.
And it doesn't.
Well, I think that's good advice. I think the one thing that I've learned just from the dating, relationships and communication, it's not it's you have something to say, and what really affects other people is how you say it.
Hmm.
It's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Yeah.
Like constructive criticism versus criticism, right?
Mhm.
So I also have a graphic design background, and you learn, just like what you said, take pause. It's not the end of the world. You learn not to take that personal. You're like, oh, you don't like my drawing? Oh, you don't like my audition? Oh, you don't like my film?
Mhm.
Okay, you know. It is what it is. There's nothing else. You just move on and learn. And, but yeah, that's
Yeah.
good advice because I think there's a lot of people who are reactive and versus proactive, you know. And I think we
I'm
see
trying
that
not to be, but
we see it all the time.
it's
We
tough.
see it.
It really is.
Yeah,
It's tough. Like,
yeah,
when you're out and it's 104 degrees out and you're getting peeled and all your gear is getting destroyed, from dust or, rain or whatever, and it's literally because somebody, higher up made a decision that might not have been the best decision. I don't know. I mean, but yeah, it can be a frustrating process.
what do you think is the most misunderstood aspect of sound mixing and filmmaking, and how can filmmakers better utilize sound and storytelling? Like, what kind of advice would you give for us indie folks who are on smaller productions?
Well, I would say first of all, if you can get to a point where you think of and treat sound as a character in itself, um, you're going to thank yourself in post because there are so many opportunities and frankly missed opportunities in my experience where sound could have been such an integral part of the story. But because nobody is really thinking about it, even when you try and bring things up and it has to start at the pre-production level. And in some cases, you don't even get attached to something until they've already scouted all the locations. The script is locked, the schedule is locked, you know, and then they're inviting you into the room. And so, you have your first production meeting after having read through the script, and it's like there's just all these big red exclamation marks and question marks, like, whoa, okay, this, and you try and mitigate all those things. But I think, you know, if someone had the forethought to, treat sound as a character, and when they're out looking at these locations and when they're putting this story together and putting the schedule together, you have 95% of the crew that is there to and their concern is what you see: grips, lighting, hair, makeup, camera, literally every department
Yeah,
besides catering and craft service and maybe the script supervisor. um, but they're all concerned with what you see:
right.
greens, art department, everything. And then you have your sound department, which on location is a sound mixer, a boom op, and in a lot of cases you have a sound utility. Sometimes you'll have a crew of four, but that's very rare, extremely rare, especially these days. Yeah, and frankly, a lot of times it is just one person. You know,
Yeah.
there are certain projects that I simply won't do unless I at least have a boom op, including
Mm-hmm.
some commercial gigs. Like if the scope of it is such that I feel like I'm doing them a disservice by trying to do it all myself, I'll just tell them, like, hey, you need to let me have a boom op, or you just need to hire someone else because I'm not going to do this. Um, but yeah, if one of the things that I just seem to run into continually is just there's a general lack of understanding for what we do and what we can do. There's also this kind of attitude of like, well, can you we'll just loop it or just fix it in post, or
Right.
and it's like, well, you can. And if you're doing a $200 million feature film, and and every day you have Ritter fans and explosions, and then yeah, chances are you're going to be looping a lot of the dialogue, and that's a given, and they've worked it into the budget and the actors know it. And you're not recording a 10-page intimate dialogue scene, with, an air compressor, you know, 2 feet away. It's like there are some things you simply cannot fix in post, and you can't loop it. You're never going to get there. You're never going to get that moment back. Because a lot of times when you get into ADR, it's months and months down the road, and that actor has gone on to play, potentially several other characters since then, and so now they're supposed to kind of come back and remember how they felt and what, just it's just fraught.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say, um, if folks could just consider sound as, just a little more of a at least higher importance, if not, like, I like to think of sound as a character.
That's good advice. I mean, it's. I know there is a consensus that with the people I've worked with, well, I won't say everybody because I've seen some of their stuff, but that sound is like, again, I'll say it again. It's the soul of the film. If you don't have sound, your film's going to be crap.
Yeah.
And people will notice right away. You'll notice you'll hear the room tone. You'll be like the reverb. You're like, what is happening? This isn't as intimate as it should be. Um, okay, real quick. Let's say this is your rubber contraption. This is the mic. How far does that lav go? You want it in?
It depends.
Okay.
Um,
I was hoping for an easy answer. Because if it's underneath the shirt,
yeah.
right?
I mean, best case scenario, it's kind of free and open, but then if it's windy, you don't want that.
Yeah.
A lot of these mounts have little cutouts in them where they can go down kind of past the plane of the mount,
Downside, yeah.
but they still have some space around them.
And the wind will get in there.
Well, or not get in there, and it's better than having it sticking up and out in the open. And then there's
Okay.
a number of different things you can do, from putting a pop filter on there to treating it with different covers, and there's no shortage of companies out there now that have products specifically for lav mics.
Those
Everyone
little
is,
fuzzy things.
oh, I'm gonna they're pretty much all the same.
Yeah. The most in this industry, because you worked on a lot of high production films, TV shows. What's the impact that it's approached you long term when it comes to mixing and like, for instance, Z Nation? I mean, you gave us an example of kind of the atmosphere, the location, and everything. And I think I felt lucky. I've been in a lot of shoots. So I'm in Bremerton, and I've filmed in Washington many times, or Washington, Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
And you're always like, oh, gotta wait for the plane, gotta wait for the traffic, gotta wait for the truck.
Yeah.
Luckily, in Bremerton, there's no air traffic, so it's fairly quiet. I better not broadcast that because then everyone's gonna come over here. But what's some of the things that really stand out, and then we'll start to close up this podcast.
I mean, it has changed to a degree over the years, but for the most part, I mean, obviously, get good sound, which, um, it's, it's weird because, frankly, I'm still a musician, and I'm still that's where my heart is. And so this 30-year career that I've had was, in a lot of ways, simply right place, right time. I mean, I got lucky, and I mean very lucky. Like, I've been able to purchase, several homes now as a result of being in the film industry, and um, you know, obviously, it's difficult to talk about that now because just the state of the industry, post COVID, post strikes, there have been a few waves where things got really difficult, and this is one of those waves where I'm kind of, right now, I'm at a point where, when that sneaker wave comes up and hits you and you're just tossed to the point where you don't even know which way is up. You're not sure how much longer you can hold your breath. You're just trying to figure out, okay, which way is up? Where is the shore? How do I get out of this without dying?
Yeah.
Um, in some ways, it kind of feels like that right now, and I think a lot of my colleagues will echo that sentiment. It's been really difficult for a lot of people. Um, so it's hard not to think of it from a financial sense and just talk about how it's basically just it's a war of attrition. And I've seen so many people be like, oh, yeah, I got to go take I got to go wait tables, or I'm going to go work for an insurance company, or their dream is to work in film,
Yeah.
and it's postponed, because there's just in some cases there's not that much work. Um, so I mean, reflectively, that's certainly a big component. Um, but it's also a bit of a downer, and I think for people who if it's in you, it's in you, and there's not much you can do about it. We joke around, and sometimes we tell people, yeah, we're carnies with dental, and we have the strangest hours, and it's such a strange job, but there's an allure to it. Part of it can be the money, but part of it, I think, is the process and the camaraderie, and the fact that you're building something that's bigger than the sum of its parts. And if you're lucky, something that you know that is somewhat timeless.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what keeps people going.
Oh, I appreciate that. That's one reason why I started a podcast.
Right on.
For this very reason.
Yeah, yeah.
Tom, what's next for you? What's anything you're working on now or in the near future?
Well, as I said, I'm finishing up this update for the Djembe Fola app, um, and really excited about that. I also have some content that this same friend of mine who got me into the industry, Brian Crane, he and I created some content years ago that just, I mean, flukishly took off, and has it's been kind of a crazy source of passive income for both of us for decades now, actually. And in some ways, the ship has kind of sailed, because there's a lot of copycats out there, and there's like if you were to try and go and repeat that, it would just uh, you would literally be drowning in a sea of white noise. And it's ironic, because the content that we created is actually it's white noise. It's natural white noise.
On Spotify.
Yeah, you can find it on Spotify. You can find it on a number of different platforms,
Yeah.
under.
We'll link it in the show notes.
Yeah. But at one point we were number one in children's music in the world,
Oh.
to the point where I think it was coming up in, because people would make playlists, for like children's parties or whatever, and so there'd be like some song about some clown or whatever, and then like this 10-minute piece of natural white noise would come in, and I imagine all these parents like, what are we listening to and why, you know but it was just the algorithms. And
Yeah.
we sat down one night at a bar in Coeur d'Alene, and we just kind of decided, like, well, okay. And this was the very early stages of iTunes and all of that, and we were just like, okay, well, what are people searching for, and what are and so when we went to various places around the world, and we recorded what we call natural white noise. And we marketed it several different ways, but the one that really took off was natural white noise for babies. Because if you've ever had a colicky baby that can't sleep, you will do anything to try and help that baby sleep. And it turns out raising the noise floor in the room is often very effective. and so it sold and is still selling like hotcakes. In
Yeah.
fact, at one point on iTunes, I think we were number 74 overall. Like
Wow.
we were beating out Katy Perry songs and stuff like
That's
that because
huge.
it was like
Yeah.
selling so much. Um, and if you go on Spotify, especially now, because I don't think their requirements are quite as stringent as some of the other platforms, there are literally hundreds of blatant copycats.
Yeah.
But I think because of how old ours is and when it came out and just the way the algorithms work, it has at least so far consistently stayed on top. Knock on
How
wood.
long ago did you put it out?
Oh God, that was
Oh, 2017.
well. That's the I think if you're looking at the link that I sent
Oh,
into the
2008.
yeah. So I think we first put it out. It was like yeah, oh 07, oh 08,
Okay.
quite a while ago.
Wow. Were
So
you so at that time? Were you like the first then?
yeah, so there were only a few other folks that had white noise content, and it was actually electronically generated white noise.
Okay.
Um, and without going into too much, technical detail, white noise is basically just, I mean, it sounds like shh, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
um, but you know, I, I just got this kind of crazy idea, like, well, what if we recorded, rain in a bamboo forest or ocean waves, or we go to, these places where people have an emotional attachment. Glacier National Park, going to the Sun Road has the Weeping Wall, and if you've ever been there, it's just like this water just cascading down the side of this wall, and it has this noise that it's white noise, and
Interesting.
and so we just started marketing it that way, and yeah, it took off,
So
and
you actually traveled to these locations and then recorded.
yeah, we brought a stereo recorder, and being a sound engineer helps. I've got
Oh yeah.
some pretty amazing mics, and so we brought uh, these stereo mics and recorded. We got these, I think, basically like 10-minute chunks, and then we would just market them a bunch of different ways.
Nice.
People with tinnitus, that was a really good seller as well. But the baby one, that's the one where it just took off like crazy.
That's the one. Yeah, that's the one I'm looking at. Okay. Well, we'll definitely link that in our show notes. We're gonna be docking the ship on this interview, Tom, but I have a few more questions for you.
Yeah, yeah.
These are good ones. You're gonna like this one. What's your favorite tech
Oh man, you mean in
when it
terms
comes to?
of production?
Yes.
So I have a couple. Let me see here. So we used to put these time code boxes on the camera, and that would link uh, the sound files to the camera files in such a way that in the edit you could, it was easier to put them together using time code. The boxes that we used to use
Holy
look like
smokes.
this, and
Yeah.
they've got some substantial weight to them.
Yeah.
But the boxes that have come out, fairly recently, now look like this.
Wow.
They do
See,
exactly the same thing.
technology.
Yeah, and so like, and the batteries on these things last forever. Like I can go a week sometimes with this thing, and I've got like four of them. Uh,
Who makes that?
this is made by Denicky. Denicky is they're the company that basically invented timecode for film.
Yeah.
Um, Timecode slates, sync boxes, and so I kind of have a certain amount of loyalty to that company. I like their products. There are a number of other products on the market that are very similar. In fact, and some of them might even have some features that these don't. But uh,
Interesting.
in my experience, this is the JB1 from Denicky, and it's just been rock solid. I absolutely love these things.
Huh.
You can hand it to a camera person, including a Steadicam op, who, if you know anything about Steadicam ops, you know their whole thing is about balancing their gear.
Mm-hmm.
So they're balancing their gear, and then you go up and hand them something like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, the look they give you sometimes is it's like, no,
Yeah.
sorry, I'm
Exactly.
not putting that on my camera. So I mean, this thing weighs next to nothing. Um, so I absolutely love this Denicky JB1.
Wow.
Yeah,
I've
awesome.
never heard of that brand before. What brand would you recommend? Well, I mean, obviously you just did, but if indie filmmakers who don't have a whole lot of money, what
Well,
kind of mic would you recommend? What
oh,
kind of
oh,
uh, lav? Because we're all like Rode mics, we're all doing that Sennheiser, that type of thing.
yeah, Sennheiser makes good stuff. Um, I My favorite microphone is the Sheps, um,
Ships.
and for a number of reasons, but primarily just the tone quality and the off axis, the lack of off axis coloration, just the warmth
Ooh,
that a Sheps mic has is
yeah.
hard to match. So they're more
Okay.
expensive for sure, but they sound really good. But then there's a lot of forums that you'll hear, you'll see arguments like, oh, the Sennheiser 50, you can't tell the difference, and like there, for recording dialogue, it's
Yeah,
there's
but
a lot
they're
of.
not. They haven't been in this business for 30 years.
Oh no, there's some folks that I work with a veteran sound mixer he was like the president of the Cinema Audio Society when I worked with him, and like this guy, I mean, he's probably got 50 years at this point
Wow.
in the industry, and he loves the Sennheisers. He just like that's his go-to is the Sennheiser 50.
Interesting.
Um,
Okay.
so it just depends.
I want to ask you how you feel about 32-bit float.
I don't. I don't feel about it. Frankly. Uh,
So you're a professional.
well, I mean, it's cool, and I think in some cases it can save your ass, especially if you're shooting, for example, full load gunfire with whispering dialogue. There's a chance that 32-bit floating point might save your ass.
Yeah.
But if you know anything about, you know, mixing sound for film, production sound, you know, it's all about proper gain staging, and you've already done all of that. And so the necessity for 32-bit and the file size that results, I just my opinion is that it's unnecessary.
If you know what you're doing.
Even if you don't, I mean, it's if you
Yeah.
don't know what you're doing, then chances are you don't know why it's going to save your ass anyways. So I don't know. It just there's a tendency in especially with sound gear, I've noticed, is to like bigger, better, faster, and I've watched these companies just roll out gear after gear after gear after gear, and like you've hardly gotten yours out of the box, and it's like outdated
Yeah.
now, and like, oh, we're on to the we're not doing the 7 series anymore, now it's the
Yeah.
and it's maddening. Like you know I have a recorder on this sound cart that a lot of people would be like, oh my god, I can't believe you're still using that, but I absolutely love the thing. I love the design. I love how robust it is. The preamps sound great. I have yet to read the manual on the thing because it is so intuitively designed. I never had to.
Wow.
I took it out of the
Yeah.
box and I started scrolling through the menus, and I look, and it's like, yep, yep, yep. It all makes sense. Um, some of the newer stuff, they're packaging more and more into less and less, and so like you have these small machines that do everything. But heaven forbid anything were to go wrong, because if something does go wrong, it's not just one little component; it's the entire thing, and
Hmm.
you're down. So I don't know. Like, there's a point at which I would just hope these companies could just like slow down and just chill out a little bit. You know?
Right. It's a consumer market for sure.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about when it comes to sound? What are your thoughts about AI?
Oof. Oh, I mean, like, as technology emerges, you can embrace it or you can get left behind. Um, and maybe it's just because I'm in my 50s now, and just
You don't look it.
where I am in my career, I'm kind of like, and the fact that I'm an artist, I'm a musician as well, and that's probably the biggest thing. And I'm looking at what AI is doing to working artists. Perfect example. And here's why I don't have a whole lot of good things to say about AI. Um, a year and a half ago, there was so much content available in the world. Unique individual pieces of creative content that, songs basically that people had written, like, say, X amount. In 1 year of AI being out, that number has doubled. So AI has basically taken every piece of music in existence and replicated it in some way or another. And that, whatever money that it generates, whatever revenue that comes out of that, it's not going to the artists. It's not going to the people who created these things. It's going to these massive record labels. It's going to, Spotify, frankly. Um, and I mean, that's a whole podcast into itself.
Yeah.
But my opinion on it is, the jury's still out, but I'm not super enthusiastic, frankly.
Tom Taylor, thank you so much for being on the Downing Cut. How can people reach you? What's the best way?
Um, well, should I give my phone number? I mean, you
Is
can
it
get
LinkedIn,
text.
Facebook? You
Yeah,
your website?
yeah.
We'll
I,
take.
I do have a website, but disclaimer, I can't remember the last time I actually updated it. I think I may have updated the resume page simply because, like, I kind of have to, but that's a bit of a can of worms for me because I simply don't have time.
Yeah.
But yes, I do have a website. It's TaylorMade Audio, all one word. And there are links, I believe, to different social media accounts that I have, including, Facebook and
Yep.
Instagram. But, you know, frankly,
Which one do you check first?
I'm on Instagram pretty much every day, but it seems less and less. I'm just kind of like,
Don't
I
worry.
kind of want to go fly kites on the beach and
Yeah.
go play my djembe. And um, it just seems like, even with social media now, it's all marketing. It's all like trying to improve one's net worth. And there's such a huge difference between worth and net worth that anymore I'm just like,
Yeah.
my time is too precious to. I don't spend a lot of time on social media. So frankly, like I tell clients, the best way to get a hold of me is text, because I'll see that I got a text. I don't have alerts on my phone for social media, so it's really just when I check it. And sometimes I'll go days without checking it. Same with email, even frankly. It's like, man, I just want to live my life. I don't want to be,
Yeah.
a slave to my email all the time.
Oh, absolutely.
But
All right.
yeah, social media is a good way, or just email.
Just don't expect a fast turnaround.
Yeah, I mean there might be.
Yeah.
it just
Surprise.
it just depends on what I'm doing and how frequently I'm checking my phone. But yeah, I'm around.
Awesome. All right. Tom, thank you so much.
You
I
bet.
appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Joe. I really appreciate yours, and what a great opportunity. I hope it doesn't. I hope I don't suck.